Today, we're going to talk about freedom of information or right to know. Now, freedom of speech is the right to send information or data to other people, and freedom of information is to receive them. Now, freedom of speech will not work unless you have people willing to listen to you. The same way, freedom of information or the right to know will be meaningful only to the extent that you have some willing sources of data and information that will give the data and information to you. So make no mistake about it, the right to know or freedom of information is severely limited by other people's privacy. So you probably don't have right to know what your friends had for breakfast. Probably you don't have right to know what your friends did last night unless they willingly tell you. But for some things you do have right to know because of the transactions that you enter into with other people. For instance, you have right to know my height. You have right to know my face, and probably you have right to know what articles and books I've written on the subjects I'm teaching. That right to know arises from the transaction that you and you enter into with me, which is that I give you, you pay your tuition to learn from me, and probably you have a right to know how I calculate your grades and how I prepare for the lectures and exams. Probably you don't have the right to know when and exactly what materials I use, but you will have some limited right. So depending on what transaction you enter into with other people, you will have some right to know, but will not have right to know other things. Now, one such entity that you enter into a lot of transactions with is the government. The government accumulates a lot of data over its subjects. The government collects tax, so knows which region pays more tax than other regions. And the government provides medical care, so the government knows which age group of which nationality in which region are likely to contract which diseases. Now, you as a constituent of that government, in a democracy, you are the owner of the government. You are the principal. The government is your servant. That is at least the idea of democracy, that people together own and control the government. So as a member of that people, you should have right to know all of the data that the government accumulates while the government provides medical care and collects taxes. Of course, if there is information that violates another's privacy, probably you don't have right to know those things. But other than that, you pay tax that pays the government. You vote that decides who runs the government. So in a democracy, you as the owner and payer, you as the owner of and payer for the government have the right to know what the government does. And in order to protect your right to know what your government does, many countries have passed this law called Freedom of Information Act. In short, FOIA, and many people just pronounce it FOIA because it is FOIA. The first of which was passed by the United States back in 1966. So, Minju, can you please open for the class the Wikipedia page for Freedom of Information Act? And you can read that it is a law that allows full or partial disclosure of previously unreleased information and documents controlled by the US government. And it this law defines what agency records are subject to disclosure, and also grants 9 exemptions, meaning 9 reasons for which the agency data will not be disclosed. 9 reasons for which it's okay not to make disclosure to the people. It works like this. If someone makes disclosure requests to the government agencies about data they have, almost all the agencies have duty to disclose their data unless any of the 9 exemptions applies. I'm going to talk about the exemptions later. But if none of the exemptions applies, then the agency must disclose that document. Minju, can you prepare to show to the class the clip from the movie Erin Brockovich? It is a real story about a paralegal who takes on huge power companies' water polluting activities and files and wins a lawsuit on behalf of the residents who contracted cancer because of the water pollution. Now, I want to explain the background leading to the clip that you're going to watch. Now, initially, this is before filing the lawsuit, before she has any idea how big this lawsuit could be. Initially, she hears from the residents about being treated for some sort of chemical named chromium and wants to find out exactly for which chromium they were treated, because the company, the polluting company sends in doctors to treat the residents, and the company doctors will not tell the whole truth. The company even told the residents that chromium is okay. So Erin Brockovich, goes to a UCLA professor to find out what's going on. Watch. And Minju, can you please stop the video at 2 minutes, at the point of 2 minutes and 30 seconds? Watch. Okay. Did you notice that the professor talks about a water board? Now, probably the power and water company has connections to the water board. It's a government agency that oversees provision of water in California, and the water board must disclose. Even when the power company, even when the water company has connections with the water board must disclose the water company's dirty history of having polluted water in the past, because although the water company is a private company, so it's not subject to FOIA disclosure obligations, water board is part of the government, so it has a duty to make disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. So now, even so, just remember that the doctor told her to be careful about what she does, because he says incriminating evidence have their way of disappearing. Now, we'll come back to that point later, but now at the end, toward the end of the clip you just watched, he says, tell me, the clerk at the water board records office, he says, tell me what you need, I'll get them for you. Now that is exactly how FOIA process is supposed to work. She comes in, she fills out a request for disclosure, and the agency checks whether such document exists, and then the agency brings back, shows her only that document that is requested. Now we're gonna resume the video clip. You'll see that it does not quite work like that. That is because it's a movie. Watch. Okay, so in reality, she was not supposed to be inside the records office, but by going inside the records office, she found out that hexavalent chromium, the dangerous one, was used by the water company. She found out from the records of disciplinary proceedings that the water board took against the water company. This is important because it's important that she went inside the records office, because she could have gotten that information only because she went into the records office herself. Because if you remember, she didn't know what she was looking for. I mean, she had no idea whether such disciplinary actions were taken against the company, and she could not say, oh, I want the records of disciplinary actions taken against the water company for water pollution, because she didn't know that such actions were taken. Now, she could not have asked, so what type of chromium was used by the water company? She could not do that, Well, she can ask that, but freedom of information is not about answering questions. Freedom of information is about disclosing the documents that exist. And she, because she got into the records office and just ransacked the place, just went through all the documents, she found out that there was a disciplinary proceeding, and then she found out that the type of chromium that the water company used was the bad one. Now, in reality, the requesting person cannot get into the records cannot review all the records. So there are a lot of disputes because people demanding the information don't know exactly what documents exist, and the agencies are not exactly very helping in identifying those documents because the agencies don't want to be criticized on their work, so they are very reluctant in letting people see the records of their actions. Later in the movie, I'm just telling you, you're not going to watch it, but later in the movie, once the corporate headquarters of the water company finds out that Erin Brockovich goes into the records office, the company pulls some strings to make sure that she cannot get in. From that point on, she files ordinary freedom of information request, and the clerk brings the documents that she identifies. Now, the movie Erin Brockovich is about a real lawsuit. It resulted in one of the largest victory in a single environmental lawsuit, and the lawsuit all began from this freedom of information request that she made at the Water Board Records Office. Because she could got that information, she could start building the lawsuit. This is the power of Freedom of Information Act. The government holds a lot of information on you, and the people need that information to get their justice from the government or from other people or companies. So, what are the data? What are the government data that are exempted from disclosure obligations? Minju, can you open can you go down the page, the Wikipedia page on Freedom of Information Act to where it says scope, SCOPE? You can enlarge the page a little bit so that people can read better. There are 9 exemptions. Number 1, when the government, when the president orders some information to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy, and the president has to classify that properly. Number 2, information related solely to the internal personal rules and practices of an agency. Now, that is to protect the privacy of government employees. Number 3, the information that the statute classifies as a secret. Now, the statute has to identify directly what information has to be kept secret. Now, statute is the law passed by people's representatives, So, people's yes, people have a right to information, but if people's representatives by a majority vote decide that that information will not be made available, then it will not be made available. Number 4, trade secrets. Now we're going to talk about this a little bit later in relation to Samsung, but it's again to protect the businesses. Number 5, interagency or intra-agency memoranda, which would not be available by law to another party, this is again to protect confidentiality of memorandum. Number 6, personal and medical files. Again, this is to protect privacy. And also number 7, law enforcement records, because a lot of law enforcement records, criminal investigation records contain private information about different people that were investigated. And number 8, the financial information. And number 9, geological information about wells. Wells where the water people use, people take water from, people get water from. Now, number 8, financial information, and number 9, and well information are probably exempt because of the sensitivity of the information. Now, in each of these 9 exemptions, there are lots of disputes whether a certain document falls under the exemption or not. But if none of the exemption applies, the government has to disclose the information. But in reality, the government often comes up with other excuses to prevent disclosure. So, Minju, can you go further down the Wikipedia page to let's see, to show a document that is blackened out? You see that document? It's blackened out here and there. Now that document shows that FBI back in 60s did surveillance on the Beatles star John Lennon, probably because of his anti-war position. Now, look at all the blackening. You can see the efforts on the part of FBI trying not to disclose information. Also, Minju, can you go down to murder trial case? Now there, the prosecutors try to cover up their unfairness to one defendant in conducting the prosecutions. What exemption do you think they try to use to prevent disclosure? Can you guess? So basically the idea was that one defendant that was prosecuted by the prosecutors thought that the prosecutors did not use the investigation records fairly for that defendant. So that former defendant wants to have access to the entire case file of the prosecutors. You're right. Probably they invoked the exemption number 7, law enforcement records. But the court said, well, it should be made available. This is a famous Supreme Court case. And also, I'll go down to where it says email. You can see that the presidents Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, all the three presidents were the same in trying not to give out email records of National Security Council discussions. What do you think they were claiming? If they were claiming exemption from freedom of information disclosure? You're right. Probably the first one. The records that the president ordered to be kept secret in interest of national defense and foreign policies. But even that was later made available. Okay, so now you know the basics about Freedom of Information Act. Minju, can you now open the link titled the www.thestar.com? It's about Samsung and freedom of information request on Samsung's trade secret. Now, more than 200 people died of cancer, blood cancer, at Samsung LCD factories. And the survivors try to prove that the cause of the cancer was this particular toxic chemical used in the factories, benzene. Now, the employees who died of cancer was using the chemical without knowing that it was benzene and had no idea what chemicals were used in that factory. But Samsung is not a private company, so it's not subject to FOIA. It's not subject to Freedom of Information disclosure obligations. But by law, any company using toxic chemical is supposed to report to the Department of Health. So Department of Health has information about what chemicals were used. And because Department of Health is a government agency, now the survivors of the victims could make freedom of information request to the Department of Health. But guess what? They claim that the list of chemicals that were used by Samsung is a trade secret. Now, this is a very, I must say, very expensive use of the trade secret exemption, because trade secret is something that other people don't know. But if you go into LCD industry, it's not really secret that it's not really secret what types of chemicals are used for making LCD panels. Probably, exactly what portions of chemicals are mixed to create the solutions. Exact percentage may be trade secret, but the types of chemicals used, the names of the chemicals, is not trade secret. But because of the exemption that the Department of Health has claimed, the lawsuit against Samsung is not going very well. Okay, well, we are talking about different freedom of information request. Minju, can you now open a OpenNet Korea link? There are two links, but the one about the freedom of information request on net neutrality. So the title should say net neutrality. Now we learned about net neutrality. Now it is a right, it is an obligation on the network operators that they not discriminate between different types of data or different contents. But ordinary people don't know whether the network operators are treating the data differently, and they are not likely to tell the customers. It took us when we filed a lawsuit against telecoms for throttling or blocking Skype calls or Kakao Talk, Kakao Voice Talk, MVoIP. It took us some time to find out whether the telcos were blocking the traffic. Now, the companies are more likely to give the information to the government agencies because the government agencies are powerful and they can take disciplinary actions against the companies. So people can, if they want to find out whether the network operators are discriminating data, they can file FOIA request on the government agencies that are overseeing the telcos. Now, so far we talked about Freedom of Information Act. Now we learn about something else. Freedom of Information Act governs what data and when the government must disclose when people ask for it. But smarter governments around the world began disclosing the data even before people ask for it. That's called open government data. And we call that transparency because the government is trying to be transparent about what they're doing even before the people ask for it. So, Minju, can you now open the link titled opengovernmentdata.org? Okay, so you can read it. Why should government data be open? There are three main reasons. Transparency. In a well-functioning democratic society, citizens need to know what their government is doing. To do that, they must be able freely to access government data and information, and to share that information with other citizens. Transparency isn't just about accessing it, but it's also about sharing and reusing that data to understand the material. The sharing and reusing is important because to understand the material that people just accessed, it needs to be analyzed and visualized, and this requires the material to be so open that it can be freely used and reused. So it requires the material to be in machine readable format, like in Excel spreadsheet right? So that's one reason. The second reason is if government data is open, it can release social and commercial value. In a digital age, data is a key resource for social and commercial activities. Everything from finding your local post office to building a search engine requires access to data. Much of the data is created or held by the government. By opening up the data, government can help drive the creation of innovative business and service that deliver social and commercial value. One such data is map data. The government invests a lot of money in creating the official map, and by making that available, Google and other companies provide the service where you can navigate through the cities. The third reason for open government data is democracy or participatory governance. Much of the time, citizens are only able to engage with their own governance sporadically, maybe just through election every 4 or 5 years. By opening up the data, citizens are enabled to be much more directly informed and involved in decision making, not just in picking their representatives, but in monitoring and criticizing what the representatives do. So those are the three reasons: transparency and industry and democracy. Now, Minju, can you open another OpenNet Korea link? And this one is about real-time subway arrival information. Now, when you try to get on subway trains, when you go down there, you see these TV screens showing exactly where the trains are and when the trains are coming in to the platforms, right? But how useful is that? Because you can see the TV screens only at the platform, right? So you are already there. You cannot do anything about the trains coming 20 minutes later, and you cannot do anything about you cannot run faster to the platform to catch the train, because you see that information only at the platform, right? Now, how useful will that be if the information is available not just at the televisions, at the platforms, but on your mobile phones, on your smartphones? That will be very, very useful, right? If you know exactly where the trains are, you can run faster, or you can do other things depending on when the trains come in. Now, the city of Seoul used to make that information available for free, and these companies made these apps, smartphone apps, through which the passengers can have that information real time. But at one point, probably some of the train operators thought that it is their information because they're the ones running the trains, and they didn't feel good about other companies making money off of how their trains are being operated. So they asked the Seoul city to stop making available that information, and we thought that is against the principle of open government data. We talked about three reasons for open government data, right? Transparency, industry, and democracy. See, making available the real-time train arrival information created industry of these apps, and I thought it was very unfair to the app developers that the city now stops providing that information. The app developers already invested a lot of time and resources into building these apps, and OpenNet, the civil society organization, protested that. So now the apps are working fine because they can continue to get the information from the city of Seoul. There are other more creative uses of there are other more beneficial and creative use of open government data. Minju, can you go to this link titled www.gov.uk, and the rest of the URL says innovative uses of government open data. And you can read a couple of case studies you find interesting. Do you know Minecraft? So apparently, the city of London is making available the map of London so that it can be used in Minecraft. Okay, and also the government is making available the information on the water quality, so that people will know from which water sources they can drink. So, open government data have all these benefits. I mean, there's no law requiring any specific information to be made available as open data, but it's certainly beneficial both for industry, both for economy and politics. Okay, Minju, now can you open the Wall Street Journal article on Google and map information? The link, the URL toward the end says Google challenges South Korea over mapping restrictions. Now, map data is one of the open data that the government makes available to commercial entities. Now, for reasons of national security, South Korean government has prohibited map data above certain precision to be or from being exported out of the country. Right? So map data above certain accuracy cannot be exported out of the country. Now, Google has servers all over the world, and all those map servers have map data of different regions, and these servers help one another out in pushing map data to every individual on Earth that has a smartphone. But most of these servers are outside Korea, and because of the South Korean law, the map data of Korea cannot be placed on Google servers. And as Wall Street journal article says that is one of the reasons that you cannot play Pokemon Go in Korea outside that one small city Kuocw on the east coast. Yes, Niantic, the Pokemon Go developer says they can open Korea service without Google Map, but the reason it is delayed beyond other countries is because Niantic cannot conveniently use Google Map, and probably that's not the most frustrating part, right? Because you foreign students cannot use Google Map in Korea, at least not above certain precision, not above certain accuracy. How do you feel about that? Google Map can be used in China and North Korea, but it cannot be used in South Korea. To be exact, Google Map of China and Google Map of North Korea can be used anywhere around the world, but Google Map of South Korea cannot be used anywhere around the world, including South Korea. It's true, Google Map works in North Korea. One of the reasons that you can play Pokemon Go in Kuocw was because that city ended up being categorized, ended up falling into North Korean zone when Niantic divided up the world. And how frustrating is it for you that you cannot use Google Map here, while Korean map providers do not provide the English services, right? My foreign guests time and again come late to the functions I host exactly for the reasons that they cannot use Google Map. Now, what can be the national security reason that justifies prohibiting placing precision map data on overseas servers? The South Korean government says, well, the enemies can attack us more easily if they have better maps. Now, that does not make sense because, see, there are domestic map providers like Naval Map and Town Map, and that provide Korean map data, accurate, high precision Korean map data, and that can be accessed anywhere around the world. I bet. North Korean military can access South Korea's precision map as long as the map data is hosted on domestic servers, on the servers of Naver and Town. So I bet if North Korea wants to set up an itinerary of invading the South and wants to figure out the fastest way for their tanks to roll from Seoul to Busan, they'll use Naval Map or Town Map, really. National security cannot be really the reason for justifying export of the map data. Now, this not really, if you remember, the open data has to be open in a manner that can be analyzed, that can be reused. Now, Korean government is very good about making available the raw data, but by banning the data from being placed on overseas servers, it is hurting the industry. It is preventing people. It is preventing foreigners from using Korean map on Google Map app. So it's not really a direct open government data issue, because the government does make available, the government does a good job of making the data accessible, but it significantly reduces the value of it by preventing the data from being placed on overseas servers. Now there's more on the controversy on Google Map data, because the South Korean government later changed its position and said it's not because of national security concern, it's not because of North Koreans cannot access, it's not because they don't want North Koreans to access precision map of South Korea, which is already available through Naver and Down Map, but it is because Google Map does not obfuscate. The Google Map shows the true locations of military facilities and other sensitive facilities like the presidential office of South Korea. But Google said, that's a different matter. If the government, the primary map data comes from the government. So if the government takes out the information on military facilities and other sensitive facilities, we're not gonna, put that information back. We'll just service the data as we receive. So that, so the new position of South Korean government also didn't make sense. Finally, the government said, we don't want precision map on Google Map because Google Map provides another map of South Korea, that is satellite images. Google buys satellite images from different satellite companies, and they show the map, the satellite map side by side with the diagram map. And because Google gets these satellite images directly from overseas satellite companies, they show military facilities, they show presidential office, and Google has Google is not under any obligation. It's not under any obligation to take out the location data of military facilities. So that's where the conflict is. There, you should think about, you should ask yourself this ethical question. How important is national security, so that people cannot even know where the military facilities are. And the truth is, people already know where the military facilities are. It's just that the South Korean government doesn't want to make it so easy for people to access it through Google Map, right? Is that a sustainable position? You should think about that. Now, finally, Another chunk of open data that smart governments around the world make available to the people voluntarily is court judgment database. In modern democracy, the rule of law is important because democracy can easily fall into majoritarian dictatorship where majority people do whatever they want to do while minorities' rights are ignored. Because in democracy, things are decided by majority vote. People are elected by majority vote. Now, it's the rule of law that establishes these values that cannot be prevailed upon by majoritarian rule. Now, how the rule of law operates is reflected in the judgments that the courts hand out. Now, do your country make available to the public database of judgments? Some countries, yes. Other countries, no. And South Korean government claims that it makes available the judgment database, but it's not true. It makes available only the cases that people ask for. So, freedom of information is about the government making disclosure of the information that the people ask, right? Now, open data is not about that. The open data is about, voluntarily making available so that before people ask, right? Now, the judgment database, the court will give you a case only if you know the case number. But that's not very helpful for people trying to learn the law through cases, right? For instance, if you know whether blocking voice over IP is bad, you want to do keyword search, right? You want to use the terms like VoIP in looking for all the cases that are about VoIP or all the cases about net neutrality. And to do that, you need to type in net neutrality. And you don't know the case numbers. You don't know whether such cases exist. And to find out whether such, you come to a judgment database. You need a judgment database to find out whether such cases exist. So the court saying, we'll give you a case if you know the case number, that's not very helpful. So, but there is one ethical question that remains. In almost all countries, trials are supposed to take place in a public setting so that other people can see how the trials are done. The main reason is that in the past, so many people were just killed off by the king or the powerful people without a trial, or if there is a trial, a very irregular, framed up trial where evidence was fabricated, people, witnesses lied, right? So to protect people from being unfairly judged, many constitutions require the trials to be open. Now, it is on the principle of open trial. Judgments in some countries are made available with all the names intact. So, For instance, if you want to know whether I was involved in any trial as a plaintiff or defendant, or as a witness, or even as a lawyer, you go to American Judgment Database, just type my name, and you can find out on what cases I was involved. Now that's how useful judgment database can be in finding out about other people. And some regulators, some governments don't like that. Actually, the main reason that the Korean courts will only selectively give out cases only upon demand is they want to give out only the case. They give out the cases only after taking out all the names, and because they don't want to spend time and resources in taking out the names on all the cases, they'll take out the names only on the cases that they receive disclosure request on. What do you think about that? On one hand, the trials take place out in the open. Anybody can come into a courtroom and watch what's going on, and they can hear all the nitty-gritty details about other people's trial. So that's publicly available information. So why not just making available all the cases without having to spend time and resources trying to redact the names, just like how the US, Australia, and many other countries are doing. Or on the other hand, some people believe that it is part of their privacy. Yes, the trials take place out in the open, but courtrooms have only so many seats, so it's not true that everybody can come in the courtroom and find out what's going on. Only a small number of people can do it. And what's made available to people in the trial is not made available to people outside, so it's still part of their privacy. Now, so there is conflict between the two positions. One more position that you should think about is people's right to know about the rule of law. Because even the people who are not involved in the trials may have right to know how justice is done in other cases, right? So think about that. That's it for freedom of information and open government data, and see you next week.